Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this last video in this series on COVID-19, the update for March 2021. This is going to be the last video in this series because I get my students back on Monday. We actually get back into the classroom, which is going to be absolutely brilliant. So before we do that, obviously I'm recording this on the 5th of March. So we're going to run through the big one, vaccines. Okay, now this obviously the vaccine program is big news at the moment. It's going incredibly well. Thank you very much, NHS and all the volunteers and all the people who are actually out there delivering these vaccines on the front line. Thanks very much for that. We're going to crack on straight through some of the questions, some of the queries and some of the outright insanity around the vaccine program that has been coming up in the news and in social media and so on and so forth for the last few weeks. So first one, which? Now you will know that there are a number of vaccines licensed for use in the UK. AstraZeneca and Pfizer are the main ones. So which one should you take, right? Is there, oh, I just have this one, don't have that one, that one's better than that one? The answer is no, it doesn't matter at all, right? The analogy I would give for this is, let's imagine you were starving, you were given a huge bowl of food, right, and you were given two slightly different forks to choose from to eat it with, okay? Now, the choice is between have this fork or that fork, and you know this fork exists, and someone offers you the other one, oh no, I'm not going to have that fork, I'm not going to eat anything because I don't have the fork that I want. That is the equivalent of saying, I want Pfizer, I want the AstraZeneca, whatever. They both are incredibly effective at doing what they want. There might be technical differences between them, and those are interesting. We'll go into those in a minute, but it doesn't matter at all which one you get, and the data that's coming out supports that more and more and more. Okay? Remember what was said in the Science versus Media version in this series, that when scientists say, oh, well, this hasn't been tested on, it doesn't mean this doesn't work, okay? It doesn't mean that. What it means is literally the vaccine's only existed for 5 minutes, so we just don't know whether it works for all these groups. We haven't answered specific questions. Like, oh, well, it works to drop their hospitalisation, but does it stop their onward transmission? Well, until we actually have them out in the population, vaccinated people, we can monitor that, we don't know. And the answer is, turns out, looking like yes, it does. The effectiveness of this vaccine program has been absolutely brilliant. So obviously, we've got different types. We've got the RNA vaccines versus modified virus vaccines, basically the Pfizer versus the AstraZeneca, and they're both really, really good. Okay, they're both the latest technology, both made by incredible scientists at BioNTech and Oxford University, who've done fantastic work to produce these vaccines in such a short amount of time. Okay, and there's lots and lots and lots of data emerging, most of which, or the vast, overwhelming majority of which I would even say, is absolutely brilliant. Okay, so well done everybody involved. Just to give you one shot, I don't know through all that data because I'm trying to keep this as brief as possible. We've got enough to say as it is, but this is the daily charts from a few days back from The Economist magazine, which you can look up online, and it shows the data on post-vaccination new cases, hospitalizations and deaths. Now, as you can see, we've got different colours here. The light blue is the 65 to 84, the dark blue is 85 plus, and then the rest of us are 0 to 64, we're in red. As you can see, look, vaccines start here. Yes, we got a big spike around December. That's Christmas easing of rules and so on and so forth. Then into lockdown, which has driven down the cases. But look what's happened in the 85 plus year olds. They have actually come down faster, right, because they started up here, peaking a little bit later, but they've come down faster as the vaccine has taken effect in that age group, and they're now as low in new cases as any of the other groups. Now bear in mind, this is a group that's way more susceptible to the virus in the first place. If you look at hospital admissions now, the number of 85 plus year olds being admitted to hospital is actually lower than the 0 to 64 year olds, okay, which is very, very impressive, okay? You would expect not to see that if this was just the effect of a lockdown, because the susceptible people, right, would still be susceptible. So something's making that difference, and that something is, of course, the vaccines. And you can actually see a clear gap opening up between the number of hospitalised for COVID 0 to 64s and 85 pluses, and of course the other age groups have been vaccinated. The 65 to 84s are in there as well, coming down way faster than the 0 to 64s. So incredible results, absolutely brilliant. We should all be breathing a sigh of relief. Thank you very much to the scientists who manufactured these vaccines and to all the volunteers and medical professionals who are delivering them. So brilliant work, okay? So, and the same goes for new deaths. As you can actually see, the fall in deaths in 85 plus year olds is dropping. Now, of course, there's a lot of nuance in this data about sample sizes of data sets and all that kind of stuff, but you should be, if you've watched the Science versus Media and Communication video, going and looking into all that stuff yourself if you're interested. So let's just have a really brief look at how these vaccines work, okay? Well, the first one, right, which is basically the Pfizer vaccine, is an RNA virus, okay? Where essentially we're just putting RNA, which is a relative of DNA, into the cells, okay? Now, this is the ones that have to be kept at incredibly low temperatures because RNA degrades. It's unstable. It doesn't last long, right? It's why we don't use it to store our genetic information. We use DNA, its more stable cousin. So what is actually happening here in the Pfizer vaccine is we've got these are one of these two types of strands of DNA, so-called non-repeating mRNA and a self-amplifying mRNA. Now, in the case of the Pfizer vaccine, it's this one. You'll see why. This one, these copies just go in, do their job, and then degrade. These ones here have got a little extra gene, which allows them to self-propagate, allows them to replicate. They both go in what's called a liposome, which is basically a bubble. It's like a bubble of cell membrane. Very much the same sort of chemistry as the bubbles in your washing up liquid, okay? And they go in to the cell here, right? And as you can see, we'll take the top one as the example because that's how the Pfizer vaccine works, right? It then basically binds on to a ribosome, which is the little bit of the cell that manufactures protein, and the RNA gives that ribosome the instructions to manufacture the COVID spike protein. It's not manufacturing COVID virus, of course, with all its pathogenic nastiness, just the spike protein. And your cell then displays that spike protein on its surface. Your immune system then spots that and goes, hey, that's new, and can then take out those viruses, those spike proteins, learn, make antibodies. You get an immune response happening where antibodies are generated, B cells, T cells, all that other immunological good stuff which you can go and look at, or if you're a GCSE and A-level student, you already know about, okay? So we're not going to go into that. So basically, it's just giving your cells the code to prime the immune system to have an immune response if the real deal comes along, okay? So there's no actual COVID here, right? There's a little tiny bit of the COVID RNA in this sort of artificially generated sequence here that enters your cells and tells your cell, make this protein, and that'll give you an immune response. Very smart, very smart. You can go and look further at this article here. Here's the reference. This comes from Nature. Right, so modified viruses do pretty much the same thing. So the AstraZeneca vaccine, this is an example of this, is doing pretty much the same thing, but is delivering the COVID spike gene through a modified adenovirus, a modified chimpanzee adenovirus. It's using instead of using that liposome and just the RNA to deliver the RNA, it's using a virus, okay, which means it's actually more stable at room temperature, which is why this is being touted as a vaccine for the world. So this can be transported and stored at warmer temperatures and is much easier to handle, right? So, but the principle's the same. So you've got the spike gene in here, you've got you've got this virus here, gets injected into you. Two different methods we could use when making these things, but the self-replicating method again and the non-self-replicating method. But in this instance, I believe the AstraZeneca is one of these, where it just goes into one of your cells, causes your cells to manufacture that spike protein, and then the immune response, the manufacture of the correct antibodies, the B cells, T cells, happens after that. And again, the reference for this diagram, for this image, this article, is just here, okay, so you can go and have a look at. So both fantastic ways of priming your body to be able to fight the real thing when it comes along using that spike protein. Okay, so I don't really know why I have to do this bit, but this is one of the major questions that I get when I'm talking about vaccines, full stops. Oh, do I have to take them? Do I need to do it? If I'm offered it, can I say no? Well, that kind of stuff. Now, most people with coronavirus are like, yeah, shoot me up. Give me everything. Give me all of them. I want to be a pincushion. I don't want to be able to use my arms, right? Which is the correct attitude, okay? And I do say correct attitude, right? And you can hold me to that. Unless you are one of the 5% of people, or the small number of people who are a medical professional, a doctor has actually told you you cannot have a vaccine for other health reasons, you should be having this vaccine. So I don't really know I have to answer this question, but there is this whole tide of anti-vaccination nonsense, which is not just stupid, it's actively dangerous as well in the way that it's put out there, the way that it's propagated, and the way it's reported, okay? Vaccines, if we look at them in the round, are the most effective medical intervention in all of human history, okay? They are This particular one is showing brilliant data every day coming out on reducing infection, hospitalisation and mortality. They work so well. They work brilliantly because they're working with your body's own immune system. Okay, they're basically keying up your body's own immune system to be able to fight this thing for itself. Best health intervention you can imagine. Absolutely brilliant. Yes, we do have to all take the vaccine when offered. Now, no one's going to hold you down and force you or run around with dart guns and dart you with vaccines. But why should we even have to be talking about that, right? Take your vaccines, okay? So let's look at some figures of previous vaccination campaigns. So if we look at the average death within the 20th century, and bear in mind, that runs up to 1999, right? That's when I was at school. You know, I was in year 10 at that point. So that's not long ago, right? 500,000 people throughout the 20th century were dying of measles every year, okay? Now it's about 1,200. That's a greater than 99% decrease, okay? So that's figures from reported in 2019, okay? We've got other ones in there. Measles, mumps and rubella, of course, are in the MMR vaccine, and there was the original vaccine controversy, as it were, or one of the ones is there. It was about the MMR vaccine. We'll come on to that in a moment, but it works so well. Mumps down by 98%, rubella greater than 99%, smallpox eradicated. You're not dying of smallpox because of vaccination, right? Polio, soon to be made extinct as well, if the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's excellent work can actually succeed in those last few pockets. We will get rid of polio. Bear in mind, there are people alive today who remember people getting polio, right? Have seen what polio can do, and it's horrible, right? Paralytic polio. And that will be wiped out, got rid of, not a problem for humans anymore. So I love it when these sort of memes come round here. Got polio? No. Me neither. Thanks, science. Diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, measles, mumps, rubella, HIV, all these different diseases that we can vaccinate for are absolutely fantastic, right? They are, these vaccines are, as I say, the most brilliant health intervention, so take them. Don't believe some lunatic on Facebook or TikTok or whatever it is telling you not to take them. Right? Look at the information, look at the data, look at the sources. Now, I really love this this animation because people go, well, can't I just wait for herd immunity? Well, if everyone else has had one, I don't need one. What those people forget is you're part of the herd. You are the herd, right? The herd is you, you are the herd. There are 5% of people in the population, as I say, who can't because their immune systems won't work, right? We all need to take the vaccine to protect them. And if you don't, because of some nonsense that you've seen on the internet, that is morally reprehensible, I would say, and I would go that far. Okay? So, absolutely no time. So this vaccine here, this so it shows about vaccination, this animation, in terms of what the numbers of populations, because we're already getting people saying, well, we've vaccinated 35% of the population. Approximately that at time of recording. That's fine, isn't it? We can just open up and all go around licking everybody's faces. Brilliant. Herd immunity. Right? Actually, you need a very, very high percentage. And I'll show you why. So you can see what the key means here. Unvaccinated is blue, vaccinated is yellow, and infected is red. And if I run this animation, like so, right, you can see, right, actually in 0, we get exponential growth, as we've already seen. But even up here at 75%, right, we're getting a huge sort of rapid spread through those unvaccinated people. So really, we need to be 90+% to get a decent stoppage of this particular virus. Okay, and if we've got 10% of people saying, "Nah, you're all right, not doing it," right, and the 5% that can't have it, then we're below that 90% and we are going to have more deaths, okay? So it's very, very straightforward, very, very simple. Take your vaccines. Right, so moving on, right, I want to mention this guy here. This is Dr. Andrew Wakefield, or to give him his correct medical title, Andrew Wakefield, because he was de-doctored correctly, in my view, by the General Medical Council for spreading lies, misinformation, bad science about the connection that doesn't exist between autism and the MMR jab. Okay, he did some terrible science. You can look into it yourself, and his paper that was published was then retracted, and got rid of by the publication. But this didn't stop the media from stoking this controversy because, again, they didn't understand the terms used and obviously more interested in selling a scare story than they were in actual public health. And as a result, we've got people who are now skeptical, in the wrong sense of the word, about vaccines, okay? Being skeptical is fine. I encourage you to be skeptical and ask questions about things that are presented to you, including everything I'm presenting to you, but be willing to change your mind, right? Skepticism involves being academically flexible enough that when you do get an answer to something in form of data, that you go, okay then, and you accept that into your worldview, right? And if you do that, there is no way you'll be an anti-vaxxer. Not one, okay? So, to give you an idea of just a little flavour of some of the COVID-19 crazy that I've seen coming up on the internet, okay? Vaccines contain baby remains. Vaccines make you sterile. Vaccines are there for mind control, right? Vaccines are not halal, kosher, vegan, vegetarian. Well, those top three there, it's not like BioNTech or Oxford have been secretive about how the vaccine's made and what's in it. They've published all this stuff. You can look at it yourself, right? Now, it might be complicated for you to understand, but that's just an excuse to learn more biology, right? Just because somebody said it on Facebook or Twitter doesn't make it true. Go and look at the information. You can also look at the independent health reports that have been published about, the independent government, can we put this into the population? Those reports are published. You can look at those, you can read those, and you can actually find for yourself from the horse's mouth answers to these things. Funnily enough, none of them are true. They just don't, okay? And this last one, vaccines being halal, kosher, vegan, vegetarian, all that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not a theologian. I'm a biologist, of course, so I don't want to speak for anyone of a particular faith or whatever it might be. But as far as I understand it, every major religious organisation in the UK has said, this is fine. Take them, right? Have these vaccines, okay? There is nothing wrong with them. You should take them. They're absolutely fine. And my personal favourite, because it speaks to another hobby of mine, is that Bill Gates wants to track you, right? Bill Gates has put a microchip in these vaccines, right? And he's going to use it to track you and find all your information and take that and flog you stuff. And this is obviously insane. But then in December, this appeared on Italian social media, which is apparently a circuit diagram of the COVID chip that's been put into. Look, here it is, proof. Not only is it the COVID-19, but it's also the 5G chip diagram. 5G, woo, right? That's one more than 4G. Ooh, that must be terrible, right? This very quickly was identified, and you might be able to get the clue as to what it is. You've seen the story. This is bass, treble. Someone's put 5G there, frequency, mid, volume, foot switch there. This is actually a circuit diagram for the Boss Metal Zone MT2 distortion pedal, which is a fantastic guitar pedal, right? It was my first ever guitar pedal when I was learning guitar as a teenager, right? Lovely sound, proper old school 90s metal sound on that. Lovely stuff, right? You couldn't fit that in a syringe, right? You couldn't fit that in it. And also, why on earth would there be a chip being put in a vaccine, right, when we all carry these things around, right? Which not only gather all of our data, right, we give it to them voluntarily and they can send them off into the ether. Okay? So, obvious insanity, but that one I did enjoy. It did make me laugh, and I still use Boss pedals to the day. They're not giving me any money for this, but if they wanted to start sponsoring me, Boss pedals, that'd be lovely. Right, so what do we do? How do we spot this stuff? Because there's so much stuff out there. Well, consider the source, I would say. Basically, where's it coming from? Is it a reliable, reputable source? What's the agenda of this source? Are they trying to sell you stuff? Are they basically just trying to make you click on links and so on and so forth? Read beyond the headline. As we've said, go back to the media video if you want. Check the author. If it's, the London School of Tropical Hygiene and Medicine and an eminent virology expert talking about epidemiology, probably pretty reliable. If that person is giving you sports tips, maybe not, you don't want to listen to them. Supporting sources, right? Where are the links? Right? Where are actually the links to publications? So someone's telling you something, where are the links there, right? Where are they getting their information from? Check the date, it might be old information, is it a joke? Websites and various other things like the Daily Mash, The Onion, all those things are fantastically hilarious satire. I love them, but people do mistake them, right, for real news. They are satire. Okay, be aware of what's a satirical place and what's not. Okay, check your biases. Now, Facebook doesn't help you with this. Neither do any of the other social media. If you click like on something, it basically feeds you more of that thing and pushes you further and further and further down into a hole. So if you sort of go, oh well, vaccines might be a click like on that, it's going to give you more anti-vaxxer stuff and even more outlandish and crazy stuff, and you're going to be moved further and further and further away from the path of truth to the towards the path of crazy, right? So be careful about your own biases. Okay, be willing to accept information that runs against your worldview. Okay, if that information is there and it's true and it stacks up, sorry, you've got to change your mind. I don't like it when that happens, but I try and be as intellectually honest as I possibly can be. Okay, ask the experts. It says here, ask a librarian or consult a fact-checking site. If we've got any librarians left in this country, thank you very much, government. But you can consult a fact-checking site, Fact Check UK, or your friendly local neighbourhood biology teacher, and I will point you in the direction of supporting evidence for the things that I'm telling you. Okay, so those are some of the things you can do. So let's move on then. Who should get the vaccine? Who shouldn't? Well, as I've said, basically everybody, but decisions are being made about who gets it when. Right, the old age down versus profession. Now, obviously, you might be spotting some biases here because there's a lot of talk in the media about teachers getting vaccinated. Now, obviously, I'm going to try and give you something of a balanced view here as to what the different pros and cons are. So there's a thing called the duty of care, and one argument is that if the government, who is my employer, and the police, healthcare, fire brigade, army, all that kind of stuff, is actually you need to go to where there might be coronavirus. You have to go and work there, and it puts you in the line of any danger. It's the employer's responsibility to actually mitigate for that danger. And if vaccination mitigates for that danger, there's an argument they should be doing that. That's the duty of care argument. The flip side would be, well, we're not actually putting you in any more danger because, if you're over the certain age anyway, you'd already be having the vaccination anyway. And obviously, if you're younger, you're not at very much risk of the virus. So being in a classroom full of kids isn't a major driving factor. But other people will go, well, how can it not be? Right? And the data doesn't really exist very much for that. There's different studies, there's different data sets on this, but it's not conclusive. Okay. It also depends on what you're trying to achieve. So what are we trying to do, right, with our vaccines? Are we trying to prevent hospitalization and death? Are we trying to prevent serious illness? Or are we trying to prevent spread? Because they are slightly different things, okay? If we're trying to prevent hospitalization and death, then yeah, age down, absolutely, right? Come from the oldest down to the youngest. But we've kind of done the most at-risk groups. So people might go, well, now we should flip to doing teachers and policemen and delivery drivers and people who are in the line of contact and retail workers, to get them vaccinated, right? Because that would prevent serious illness. I'll give you an example. You might know many people who've been seriously ill with COVID but didn't go to hospital because they could manage it themselves. My sister was one of those people. She's a primary teacher. She was put in the line of fire, effectively in with a group of students, looking after key worker kids all the way through, and she got the ill. Now she's young and fit, so she didn't get hospitalised or die, but she was horribly ill for a week. Is that the priority now? Do we want to prevent that from happening, right? Why shouldn't she have a vaccine where somebody who might be a 65-year-old worker from home, right, who never has to go out, has a job that just involves being at home, why do they get that first? That's really a government decision, right? It's not a scientific decision. That's something for you to think about yourself. Are we trying to prevent spread, in which case we should do the most mobile people, lorry drivers, delivery drivers, home visitors, social workers, right? Are these people that we really should be protecting? Because what are we trying to do? Are we trying to get to COVID zero? Because if we are, probably not going to happen, right? Because, it's like it's a rapidly mutating virus. See the variants video. It's not so easy to do that. Is it going to become like the flu, where we have to have boosters? Oxford and AstraZeneca are already putting together new vaccines, sort of tweaked vaccines for coronavirus for future use. Okay, so it really depends on the question that we're asking. Okay, and that's a theme of this series. But obviously, one group we really do need to push in is the British, the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups. This essentially is, that these groups are overrepresented in COVID deaths, right, for various reasons, and underrepresented in terms of vaccine take-up. Now, reasons for this could be language, it could be cultural, could be accessing a GP, they might not be registered GP, it could be to do with living in areas of extreme deprivation where they're not registered with a doctor or so on and so forth, or it could also be to do with the fact that we've had a government in power for the last 10 years who've created a hostile environment towards people from other nations, okay? And I'm not using that term as my own. The hostile environment is a specific thing the British government said that they were doing, and they even drove vans around London telling people to go home, right? So if you are from a different group, or a different nationality, even if you are British national or not, you might feel less inclined to engage with a government-backed national healthcare scheme. You might feel distrustful, all right, rightly or wrongly, okay? But a lot of effort needs to go in there, and a lot of effort rightly has been going in there, because these people are from different ethnic groups do seem to be more likely to contract and suffer negative consequences with the disease, which is obviously not on, right? This needs to be equitable, okay? So lots of effort is needed there. Right. Last thought for you, question. I'll give you pros and cons on this because I don't really know what I think on this. Vaccine passports, okay? The idea of, should you have a passport like for yellow fever, or if you've had the vaccine, you get a certificate or a thing on an app or something like that that says, yep, I've had it. Pros, obviously, it would allow you to travel, to go out, to prove vaccination status and to work with vulnerable people, do certain jobs. Already, certain travel providers, Saga Cruises, certain healthcare providers, like care homes, are saying no vaccine and no vaccine proof, then no coming on board our cruise or no working with us. So you can't have this job if you haven't been vaccinated. And if you're working with vulnerable people, I can kind of see that. But if you're not and you choose not to have a vaccine, I think you're wrong. I think you're morally wrong, right? But then, should that exclude you from job employment if you're the most qualified person? Okay. Obviously, equality of access as well. If it's going to be like on an app on a smartphone, well, if you haven't got a smartphone, right? This is very, very tricky, right? The use of the private sector. This government seems to be obsessed with using the private sector to gather our information and then, sort of use it and have a big data set. Now, looking at how track and trace has worked and looking at other private sector involvement, I'm not that comfortable with all my health data being handled by a private company, right? Who could fold, go bankrupt, leak, that kind of stuff. Very hard to hold to account if something goes wrong. Whereas the government, if they're holding your data, they're far easier to hold to account. Okay? Quite far more static. So that's a worry for me. Insurance, if you haven't been vaccinated, does life insurance go up? Right? Employment in non-health related sectors, does that become more important if you don't have vaccine passports? Okay? It's a difficult one, and there's a whole discussion of this on this podcast, which I highly recommend, How to Vaccinate the World. It's one of the few podcasts I listen to, the other one being BBC More or Less, that is hosted by Tim Harford, who is a fantastic science communicator and explainer of data. Highly recommend having a listen to any of his work. He is very, very good at this science communication malarkey. Okay, so there's a thought. So let's think final thoughts before we wrap this up. The vaccines are delivered by the NHS and volunteers, and we owe them our thanks. We really, really do. Okay. Now, it might be that the government will start to try and take credit for the vaccine rollout. Really, I don't think they have a leg to stand on there. We need to be grateful to those retired healthcare workers who are coming back in, stepping up to do these vaccines. The scientists at Oxford who originally made the vaccine that most of us are going to get. Really, the government wasn't necessarily involved with all this kind of stuff. So we need to give credit where it's due to this amazing group of people who are delivering our vaccine. Sorry for the typo here, but if you are offered the vaccine, you take it, right? Because you are protecting those who can't. Okay? Take your vaccines because you protect those who can't. And if you don't, you are putting already vulnerable people at risk, and that is morally reprehensible, in my view. Take your vaccines. So, obviously, the key point there is that you are part of the herd, okay? It's your moral responsibility to do so. And please, 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 learn to be skeptical of the crazy. Don't believe the crazy. And if you don't know if something's crazy, ask. I would love to discuss this with you and have a little chat, Right, so that's obviously my key messages, but let's look at the things to look forward to. Obviously, there's all the social stuff. I can't wait to see my friends again when things start easing. I can't wait to sit in gardens and go to restaurants and go to pubs and the theatre and so on and so forth. But it has been a bad thing, right? It's been a terrible thing for humanity, the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously, right? Many millions have died, and that is obviously really sad, okay? So I'm not trying to say that there's something good overall that will come out, but there are perhaps some good things to look forward to. The first of which I would say is we're all better at remote working now. We've proven that we don't need to drive for miles and hours every morning to sit in an office, to do computer-based work, to come home to drive home at night. We don't need to do that, right? We can do a lot of jobs from home, and this will make it so much easier to balance family life and work, to give flexible working, and therefore encourage more people who have families into the workforce, right? That's a good thing. Less transport costs, fewer transport costs. If we're going to go off to work, right, even if we're only moving 3 days a week, all that kind of stuff, the environmental impact of that will be fantastic. The roads less crowded, absolutely brilliant, okay? We also have a greater awareness of infectious disease in general, because it's worth noting that as lockdowns have dropped COVID, they've also dropped flu and colds and all that kind of stuff, and that is brilliant, right? That's really good. Maybe if we keep this embedded knowledge we now have about mask wearing, isolation, hand washing and hygiene, we will actually see that persist. That's a hope for the future for me. We've also got questions about treatment of nature, which I hope will be addressed and answered. Where did this virus come from and how can we stop it happening again? And our abuse of nature and the natural world, okay? Less tolerance of damaging conspiracies. Hopefully this will shine a light on fake news and bad medical media and will be more robust at rooting this stuff out. More appreciation of the value of key workers, right? And I don't just mean banging pots and pans together on a Thursday, because that isn't appreciation, that's just virtue signalling, right? I mean in terms of people who actually have stepped up to save lives in terms of their living wages, their conditions, so on and so forth. And let's value in society the nurse higher than the investment banker, I would say. And hopefully we can start to redress that, the doctor more than the footballer. Okay, let's see if we can do something with that, and that's a hope that I might look forward to. And of course, for me, everybody knows more biology. You all know what an R number is. You all know what viral transmission is. You all know what epidemiology is, and that is great because it makes my job much easier. So, thank you very much for listening to my ramblings, if indeed you have. There's plenty more on the channel if you would like to learn about biotechnology, infectious disease, any of this kind of stuff. And if you fancy it, like, subscribe, do all that stuff that my students keep telling me to say at the end of videos, and leave a comment if you've got any additional questions. Thanks very much. I look forward to seeing you, some of you live back in the classroom, get my students back, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.